Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padang Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Nitinamine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda
Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda
Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda
Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda
Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna. I'm very happy to be here with all of you who are attending this series of lectures that has been organized so thoughtfully by the strategic planning team of the GBC. I'm sure you've heard many wonderful lectures so far on a variety of topics from many of our senior devotees. It is an honor to get an opportunity to speak to all of you, especially on such a nice topic, Achintya Bhedabheda Tattva. So the word Achintya means inconceivable, Bheda means difference, Abheda means non-difference, and Tattva means principle or truth. So Achintya Bhedabheda Tattva is the principle of inconceivable and simultaneous oneness and difference. Now, this is actually one of the cornerstones, or one could say one of the foundational pillars of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's teachings. It is actually the perfect conclusion of the Bhagavat school, if one may term it like that. And unless we understand this philosophy, we cannot understand Mahaprabhu's teachings. We cannot understand the true teachings of the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, and we cannot become devotees. So, before we begin, the actual topic of the simultaneous oneness and difference, we have to consider difference and oneness between what? Between what categories? So basically, we're going to speak of three categories. The first category is God or Krishna. Within this category, we have Krishna, and then we have innumerable expansions of Krishna, who are also Vishnu Tattva. So they're in the same category as Krishna. They're also God. Then we have the living entities or Jiva. And within Jivas also, as a category, there are so many varieties. And then there is the variety or the category of matter or the material world. And within this also there are so many varieties. So essentially, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has taught that the Vedic teachings can be understood and in three levels: Sambandha, beg your pardon, Abhidheya, and Prayojana. Sambandha means establishing the relationship. Abhidheya means acting according to the relationship. And Prayojana means the fruit or the ultimate goal or the result of acting in that way with that understanding. So when we speak of Sambandha Jnana, what do we mean? Sambandha means relationship. Relationship between what? It is essentially relationship between these three categories. The category of Krishna or Vishnu Tattva, the category of Jiva or the living entity, and the category of matter or the material world. So these are the three fundamental categories, and all philosophy since time immemorial has essentially dealt with these three categories. And each type of philosophy has had its own peculiarities or its own special understanding of these. And naturally, the teachings of Mahaprabhu, they establish the understanding of this in a very sublime way. Now, some philosophies focus on one to the exclusion of the other two. Some focus on two to the exclusion of the third. Some may incorporate all three but have mistaken understandings of these three or of the relationships amongst them. For example, today it is quite a common understanding that the living entity is essentially matter. So let's say in modern science or in many other philosophies, they don't accept the existence of a spiritual soul, the jiva, the atma. They consider the self to be matter, made up of matter, which is of course fundamentally wrong. And this is the basic teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. So this is one mistaken idea. They consider jiva and matter, the living entity and matter, to be the same. And then they may understand there is a God, or they may not understand there is a God. But if somebody doesn't believe in the existence of a spiritual spark, it's very difficult to have a complete understanding of God as well. Then you may have another understanding where people say that matter is everything. There is nothing beyond matter. There is no soul, there is no God. Modern science speaks of that. So that's the kind of a philosophy that we may term as pantheism, because pantheism means that there's nothing more than matter, and that the material world itself is God. If at all you have to have God, then that's the universe. For example, when we speak in terms of God being the creator of the universe, and everything has a cause, and God is the full stop. So they say, well, why bring in God? Because you don't have an answer to who created God. So God is a full stop. So we say matter is a full stop. There's no need to ask what created or who created matter. So therefore for them, matter is the full stop. There's nothing beyond matter. And a variation of that will be that matter itself is God. So this is pantheism. So there are a variety of philosophies. Then there are those who will say that God exists, but he may be impersonal. God exists, but we are also God. So there are all these unlimited types of speculative philosophies in existence. And what I'm going to do is to read from Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur's purport to the last verse of the Brahma Samhita. You all know this PBT edition of the Brahma Samhita. So the 62nd verse, in which Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, in the beginning of the purport, outlines some examples of fallacious understandings or mistaken ideas of reality. And then he says, and by the way, in this verse and the verse, a few verses previous to that, Brahma has finished offering his prayers, the Brahma Samhita, to Krishna, and Krishna is now replying to him. So it is Krishna who's speaking the 62nd verse. And Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur is basically giving the purport in the voice of Krishna. So he says, by discarding all these speculations, by these speculations we mean all these philosophies of the kind that I mentioned a few moments ago. So by discarding all these speculations, you and your bona fide community, that means Brahma's community, Brahma's Sampradaya, should adopt the ultimate principle identical with the doctrine of Achintya Bhedabheda, inconceivable simultaneous distinction and non-difference. This will make you eligible for being a true devotee. A very important point. So what Krishna is saying to Brahma is essentially, according to Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, that and Bhakti Vinod Thakur also, that unless you understand the Achintya Bhedabheda principle properly, and you give up the understanding of all these erroneous ideas of reality, of all these wrong philosophies, you will not be able to be a devotee. So if you want to be a devotee, the understanding of the Achintya Bhedabheda Tattva is very important. And then in the very last part, in the last sentence of the same purport, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur says, so let the attainment of love for Krishna by the practice of pure devotion through the knowledge of their mutual true relationship that subsists between the jiva, the jada or matter, and Krishna, based on the principle of inconceivable simultaneous distinction and non-difference, be my instruction for being handed down in the order of spiritual perceptional succession in your community, the Sri Brahma Sampradaya. So here, Krishna, in the words of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, is telling Brahma, first of all, there are certain messages that he wants Brahma to communicate in his Sampradaya, in his disciplic succession. The first is love for Krishna. The second is love for Krishna is attained by the practice of devotion. Number 3, this practice of devotion is based upon the knowledge of the true relationship between the living entity, the material world, and Krishna. So these 3 very important points that are being made here, and this relationship is one of the Achintya Bhedabheda Tattva. And it is this instruction that Krishna asks Brahma to transmit down to his followers in the disciplic succession called the Brahma Sampradaya. So as followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we are also in the Brahma Sampradaya. We are in the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya. We are followers of Brahma, also Madhvacharya, and specifically a branch that has come from the Madhva Sampradaya, which is Gaudiya Sampradaya, which is the Sampradaya of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So notice that in the very last instruction that Krishna gave to Brahma in the Brahma Samhita, or what we have of it, the 5th chapter, he mentions these 3 things that I mentioned right at the beginning: the living entity, Krishna, and matter or the material world. So essentially, understanding the interrelationships between these 3 is crucial. Understanding that all these three are simultaneously one and different from each other is essentially what the Achintya Bhedabheda Tattva teaching is all about. So therefore, we can speak of the relationship between the Jiva and Krishna, the relationship between the Jiva and the material world, and the relationship between the material world and Krishna. Now, another interesting point, that apart from these three interrelationships, there is also the question of interrelationship amongst entities within each category. So for example, within the category of Krishna, as I mentioned in the beginning, there are innumerable expansions like Narayan, Vishnu, Sankarshan, Vasudeva, Pradyumna, Narasimha, Matsya, so many. So what is the relationship of Krishna or Vrindavan with all of these? Then in the category of Jiva, there are so many living entities of so many different types. We see that in the material world. And there are many living entities who live in the spiritual world too. So what are the relationships between them? And then matter. There is so much of variety that we see in the material world. What is the relationship between the items that are found within this variegated material world? So the answer is that the relationships not only between the categories, but also within the categories can be understood in terms of the Achintya Bhedabheda Tattva. Very important point. So, in one of the purports in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the 3rd canto, chapter 28, text 41, Srila Prabhupada says, everything is simultaneously one and different from everything else. That's a very deep, very profound statement to make. Everything is simultaneously one and different from everything else. So the philosophy of Achintya Bhedabheda Tattva holds basically that the Supreme Lord is simultaneously one with and different from his creation. That is to say, Srila Prabhupada explains, there is unity in diversity. And many times Srila Prabhupada gives the example of sun and the sunshine. Sometimes he speaks about the sun god, the sun globe, and the sunshine. And he speaks about how there is a oneness of quality. The sunshine is one in quality with the sun globe, who is one in quality with the sun god. But there is still a difference. There is a difference in the quantity. We may stand in the sunshine and feel a little warm, comfortably warm, if it's the winter season. But we cannot stand in the sun globe in this body. So therefore, there is a difference as well in quantity, but there is a oneness in quality. So in this way, Srila Prabhupada explains that this philosophy of Achintya Bhedabheda Tattva cannot be understood by one who is fully under the influence of the external energy. He cannot understand the nature and forms of the personality of Godhead. So understanding therefore of this principle of Achintya Bhedabheda Tattva is very important. So let's try to understand these inter-category relationships first, and then we'll go to the intra-category relationships, and we'll apply the Achintya Bhedabheda principle in each of these examples. So let's take the case of the relationship between the Jivas and Krishna. Now, there are two extremes, as I mentioned earlier. One is to consider the self to be matter. There is nothing spiritual. We are not spiritual beings. We are just material. We are only the material body. So this is the materialistic conception of the self. So obviously that is not true. And there are others, specifically the Mayavadis, who consider that the individual self actually is the same as the Supreme Self. In other words, what they say is Jiva and Krishna are one in every respect, and there is no distinction There is no difference between the two. So this is called monism. Monism or oneness as opposed to duality, where there's a distinction made between the Jiva and Krishna. So therefore, philosophers from the Advaita or the Mayavad school consider the oneness of the Jiva with the Supreme Lord, and that is something that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his followers do not accept at all, because that is not the conclusion of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and neither it is of the Bhagavad Gita and the other Vedic literature. So Srila Prabhupada says in one purport that except for the devotees of the Lord, all other transcendentalists make no distinction between the individual soul and the super soul, because they miscalculate the super consciousness of the Lord and the individual consciousness of the Jiva to be one and the same. And such miscalculation makes them unfit for receiving the cooperation of the Lord, Prabhupada says. They are denied the mercy of the Lord. Therefore, they cannot become devotees. One example that Prabhupada gives often and Mahaprabhu gives also is that of a spark and a fire. Now, a fire is massive and a spark is an infinitesimal part of the fire. So, similarly, the Supreme Lord may be compared to the fire, and the individual living entity may be compared to a spark. So that spark is one in quality with the fire, just as a living entity is one in quality with the Lord, meaning that the stuff of which the Jiva is made is the same as the stuff of which the Lord is made, which is spiritual substance, Chinmaya Tattva, Satchidananda Vigraha. Krishna's body is made of eternity, knowledge and bliss. It's not made of any material elements. So the spiritual, the constitution of the individual living entity, the soul, is also the same. So one in quality, but the spark, once it's separated from the fire, will get extinguished, unless it falls on dry grass, where it can actually cause a big fire, a big blaze. So if the Jiva is in connection with Krishna, then it will be alive, so to speak. But if the Jiva separates itself from Krishna, it's like falling on wet ground, where it will soon be extinguished, meaning its spiritual consciousness will be extinguished. So there are numerous such examples that we find in Srila Prabhupada's books and his lectures. Now, we don't have enough time to discuss each relationship in detail, so I'll just very, very briefly go from relationship to relationship. Also, another thing that Srila Prabhupada mentions in the purport is that there are a variety of living entities in the material world and also in the spiritual world. And there is a difference in the two categories of living entities, but those in the spiritual world and those in the material world are both under the control of Krishna. Both have a relationship with Krishna. It's just that those in the material world have forgotten that relationship. And being oblivious of their constitutional position, they try to enjoy in vain, separately from Krishna. So Krishna has expanded himself, or rather, his marginal potency has expanded to form all these living entities, the jivas, who inhabit the material world and also the spiritual world. Of course, in the spiritual world, there are also other categories who are not exactly Vishnu Tattva, but who also are, who exist there. But that's a different topic. We won't get into that now. So anyway, this is how we can understand that the jivas are one with Krishna in quality, but they are different in Krishna in quantity. So one in quality, different in quantity. Infinitesimally small is the jiva, infinitely great is the Supreme Lord. Then let us consider the relationship between the jiva and the material world. The jiva and the material world, of course, is an interesting relationship. Srila Prabhupada explains that sometimes scientists argue that there is no difference between spirit and matter. There is nothing like spirit, there is only matter. But Prabhupada says, factually, in a higher sense, there is indeed no difference between spirit and matter. But one should have the practical knowledge that matter, being an inferior state of existence, cannot give us the blissful spiritual life that we are hankering for. It is incapable of that. Whereas spirit, being a finer state of existence, is fully capable of doing that. So an important point is made here, that at a higher level, which means from the point of view of Krishna, there may be no difference between matter and spirit because both are energies for him. One is a marginal potency, the other is the external potency. So these two are one in the sense that they are both energies of Krishna. They both are controlled by Krishna. They belong to Krishna and they're meant to be used in the service of Krishna. So there is a oneness there. So in a higher sense, we can understand this oneness in the relationship between the jivas and matter. However, because matter is the inferior state in a practical sense of its efficacy in giving us blissful existence, and spirit is efficacious in terms of giving us that blissful state, so we must distinguish between the two. So in terms of the relationship between the jiva and matter, there is oneness and difference simultaneously. So it's also interesting that in this connection, the word Achintya is used. Achintya indicates inconceivable. Why is it inconceivable? Why does Krishna say, or Mahaprabhu say, that it's inconceivable? One reason for this is that the fact that everything rests in Krishna, the material world rests in Krishna, the material world comes from Krishna, and yet Krishna is aloof and transcendental to it, is something that is inconceivable. And also another factor that makes it inconceivable is that from Krishna, these energies emanate. The material creation emanates, the living entities emanate, and they emanate unlimitedly. And despite such unlimited emanation from the Supreme Lord, he remains unlimited. So we all remember the verse from the Ishopanishad, Om Purnamadaha Purnam, etc. So from the Purnam, many Purnams emanate, but what remains is also still Purnam. So this is also something inconceivable. So far we've considered the relationship between the jiva and Krishna and the jiva and the material world. And we saw how there is simultaneous and inconceivable oneness and difference between the two. Now let us consider the material world and Krishna. Since the material world is the energy of Krishna, it's an expansion or a manifestation of the inferior energy of Krishna, and since there is no difference between the energetic and the energy as per the Vedanta Sutra, therefore the material world is one with Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada says, being an emanation from the glancing potency of Narayana, the whole material creation is not different from him. But because it is the effect of his external energy and is aloof from the internal energy, the whole material creation is different from him at the same time. And Srila Prabhupada gives the example of a person who is dreaming. So when we dream, we create many things within our dream. And we become entangled in that dream. Though the seer of the dream becomes entangled in the dream. It is also affected by the consequences. So for example, if we dream of something very frightful, then we may wake up in a sweat. We call it a nightmare. And we wake up from our sleep very disturbed about it. So we dream, but we get entangled and we also get affected by the consequences. Now, the material world, Krishna says, is also like a dream-like creation of the Lord, but the difference being that the Lord is not entangled in that dream state, and neither is he affected by the consequences of that quote-unquote dream. He remains ever aloof or transcendental, and he remains unaffected. He remains ever in control of the material creation, even though he is transcendental to it. Another example that Srila Prabhupada gives to illustrate the oneness of the material world and Krishna, and also of the living entities in Krishna actually, many of these analogies can be employed to understanding both of these. He gives the example of ornaments made of gold and the gold mine. So because the ornaments are made of gold, they are one in quality with the gold mine. But there is a huge difference between a particular ornament of gold and the entire gold mine, which has a huge stock of gold. So oneness in quality and a difference in quantity. So Srila Prabhupada explains that everything rests on the potency of the Lord, and yet he is different from and transcendental to that. So the gold stock is never exhausted in a gold mine. Even if there are innumerable ornaments that are made out of that gold. Similarly, even though infinite material universes emanate from the Supreme Lord, he still remains ever complete, always complete and full. So, in this way we understand that the material world is one with Krishna and is also different. The analogy of the sun and the sunshine is also again employed for this purpose. Okay, so now we have understood the interrelationship between the Jiva and Krishna, the Jiva and matter and Krishna. And we have seen how there is a simultaneous oneness and difference between these. Now, as far as the Jivas are concerned, there is also the question of the demigods. The demigods are mostly Jivas, like us, except that they are extraordinarily more powerful because they are personal representatives of Krishna and they perform Krishna's task of administering this universe. And even though Brahma is a Jiva, but he's so powerful that that power is beyond our imagination. So the same principle would apply to Brahma also as it applies to us ordinary Jivas. But there is one exception here, and that is of Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva, as we all know, is not quite the Supreme Lord, but he's not a Jiva either. Actually, he's a Mahabhagavat. But due to his association with Maya, he becomes affected, and therefore he is not exactly considered God. He's an expansion of the Sadashiva form of the Lord in Vaikuntha. Sadashiva is a four-armed Narayana form, Vishnu Tattva in Vaikuntha, and that Sadashiva expands himself to form Shambhu. Now this Shambhu is different from Sadashiva in Vaikuntha because Shambhu is in touch with the material world. And because he's in touch with the material world, he loses that identity with Vishnu. So even though he's very close to Vishnu, but he's still different from him. But he's one because ultimately he's an expansion from Krishna. So in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, one of the purports, Prabhupada says, Rudra is simultaneously one and different from the Vishnu Tattva. Due to his association with Maya, he is different from the Vishnu Tattva, but at the same time, he is an expansion of Krishna's personal form. This situation is called Achintya Bhedabheda Tattva, simultaneous oneness and difference. Of course, we know the famous example given in the Brahma Samhita of milk and yogurt. Milk and yogurt are basically the same substances. Yogurt comes from milk. So basically they are the same, but functionally they are different. Because yogurt is a transformation of milk when some sour substance is added to the milk. So there is a oneness between milk and yogurt, but there is also a difference. In the same way, we may compare milk to Lord Vishnu, and we may compare yogurt to Lord Shiva. And we may compare the sour substance that is added to the milk to transform it to yogurt to the touch of material nature. So, in this way, the conclusion, Srila Prabhupada says, is that Rudra or Lord Shiva is not exactly Lord Vishnu, but rather a transformation of Lord Vishnu. Thus, he is inconceivably one with Vishnu and different from him. So, in this way, we can understand the position of Lord Shiva. Prabhupada further says that in his constitutional position, Lord Shiva is a Mahabhagavat, but because he accepts the association of Maya, he is not free from Maya's influence. So, in this way, we understand the oneness and difference between the jivas and also the Shiva Tattva with respect to Krishna. Also, a brief mention may be made here of the Shakti Tattvas, the most prominent among whom, or the chief amongst whom is Srimati Radharani, who is the personification of the condensed blissful potency of the Lord. So because there is no difference between the energy and the energetic, so Srimati Radharani is also the same as Krishna. She is simultaneously one with Krishna because there is no difference between energy and energetic. Both are same in quality and both are same in bhava or mood. There is an intense relationship of love between Radharani and Krishna. So there is a oneness there, but at the same time, there is the Shakti and the Shaktiman. So Krishna is the source of energy and Radharani is the energy. So in this way, this applies also for all the gopis who are expansions of Radharani, or all the other entities who are expansions of Krishna or Balaram in the spiritual world. So therefore, the principle of Achintya Bhedabheda Tattva, we can see, actually applies to all these relationships. Remember what I started out with, a quote of Srila Prabhupada, that everything is simultaneously one and different from everything else. Let's now come to the intra-category relationships. Let's take the category of jivas. There are so many living entities that we see here in the material world. So many different species of life. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Vidya Vinaya Sampanne Brahmane Gavihastini Shuni Chaiva Shvapakecha Pandita Samadarshinaha. that a person situated in knowledge sees everyone with equal vision, whether it's a brahmana, whether it's an elephant, a dog eater, etc. Samadarshanaha means one who sees equally. So there is an obvious diversity between all these categories mentioned here. Between a human being, between a cat, a dog, an elephant, etc. There is a wide disparity, a diversity, a difference. Even amongst human beings, there are so many differences in nature, in personality, in appearance. So there is an enormous amount of diversity amongst the living entities in this material world. So we see the difference between living entities. But then why is Krishna in this verse speaking of the oneness? The oneness is on the spiritual platform. So if we do not recognize that oneness and we only see the difference, it means that we are situated in materialistic consciousness. However, if we see the oneness but do not see the difference, then we will be in trouble. For example, after hearing this shloka from the Bhagavad Gita, and we go right up to a tiger in the jungle to shake hands, because after all we are all one, then that will be a mistake. So we must recognize at a practical level that there is a distinction also to be made. So amongst all the species of life, of the living entities living here in this material world, there is a oneness underlying all the diversity that we see at the bodily level. So there is simultaneous oneness and difference in this sense. So the principle of simultaneous oneness and difference, when it's applied to different categories and into various types of interrelationships, can be applied in different ways. Let's consider another category of the living entities, that is the spiritual master. And this is a topic in itself. And Srila Prabhupada explains that actually the spiritual master is a servant of Krishna, is a living entity, is a jiva, but because the spiritual master is a dearmost servant of Krishna, is a devotee of Krishna and doesn't say anything separate from Krishna's words, is a representative of Krishna, so therefore the spiritual master is seen as being one with Krishna. Not in the ontological sense that the jiva or that the spiritual master is actually God ontologically. No. The spiritual master is a jiva, but because of his being one in love with Krishna, because of his being a transparent via medium to Krishna, there is a oneness there. So there is a oneness and difference between the Guru and Krishna. Now let's also consider the liberated entities in the spiritual world. Most of them are jivas. There are many who may be kaya vyuha. Kaya vyuha means the bodily expansions of Radharani or Krishna and so on. But they all serve Krishna in different ways. So they also have a simultaneous oneness and difference amongst themselves. Because some are serving Krishna in the mood of servitude, some in the mood of fraternal love, some in the mood of parental love, etc., etc. The gopis in the mood of conjugal love. So there is a difference in their mood of service. There is a difference in their appearance even. But there is an underlying fundamental oneness. They're all purely spiritual entities. Not a trace of material existence can be found in them. And they're all 100% pure devotees. So there is a oneness in that sense, and there's also a difference between them. So here I discussed briefly the Achintya Bhedabheda Tattva in the intra category, within the category of jivas. Then let's consider the relationships between the different elements or the personalities in Vishnu Tattva. Or in the category of God or the absolute truth. Firstly, the Bhagavatam says, Vadanti tat tattva vidas tattvam yadjnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavan iti shabdyate. That the absolute truth can be understood in three phases. Of the impersonal Brahman, the localized, all-pervasive super soul, the Paramatma, who is in everybody's heart and in every atom, and also Bhagavan, the individual personality of Godhead, who resides in the spiritual world. Now, all three are different facets of the absolute truth. So they are one in spiritual substance. So Krishna is one with the Brahman in the sense that the sun is one with the sunshine, or the sun God is one with the sunshine. So Srila Prabhupada has compared Bhagavan to the sun God. He has compared the localized Paramatma to, let us say, the sun globe, and he has compared the Brahman to the sunshine. So there is a oneness between these three phases or aspects of the absolute truth, but there is also a difference. And it is from Bhagavan that Paramatma and Brahman emanate. Brahman is the bodily effulgence of Krishna that spreads all through the spiritual world, and eventually its reflection is found in the material world. It is the basis on which the entire material creation is stationed, so to speak. And Paramatma is also an expansion of one of the expansions of the Supreme Lord. So, Kshirodakashayi Vishnu. So they're all one, and there is a difference as well. Now, in this category of God, let's consider other personalities in the category of Bhagavan. And we have Krishna in Vrindavan, we have Balaram in Vrindavan, then we have Dwarkadhish in Dwarka, Mathuresh in Mathura. We have Lord Ram in Ayodhya, we have Lord Narayan in Vaikuntha, we have Lord Nrsimha, we have Lord Vamana, Lord Matsya, and innumerable other such incarnations or expansions of the Lord, all in the category of Bhagavan. So, all of these are the same because they are expansions of the Supreme Lord. And they have expanded from Krishna eventually. Some are, Balaram is a direct expansion of Krishna, and then from Balaram comes Sankarshan, and then all the other expansions, Vasudev, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, etc., and further expansions going on. So in the Brahma Samhita, Brahma has said, I'll not quote the verses in order to save time, that Krishna is like an original candle who lights innumerable other candles of equal potency. So each of these candles are one in the sense that the illumination they reflect are the same. The power of illumination is the same, quality and quantity is the same. And they are the one same person. However, Lord Krishna in Vrindavan is that original candle who lights all other candles. So even though there is an ontological oneness between Krishna and all his Vishnu Tattva expansions, there is also a difference. There is a difference of rasa, a difference of mellow, of mood. Lord Nrsimhadev's mood, for example, is different from the mood of Shyamasundar or Govind in Vrindavan. So I was mentioning the other day in another class where Srila Prabhupada mentions in the teaching of Lord Chaitanya that even though Lakshmipati, the Lord of Lakshmi, Narayan in Vaikuntha, is the same as Rukmini Raman, the husband of Rukmini Devi in Dwarka, who is the same as Radha Raman, Krishna, who is with Srimati Radharani in Vrindavan. Even though they are the same Krishna, they're the same personality, but they have a difference of mellow. And trying to bring Radha Raman into Vaikuntha or Dwarka is a mistake. It's called rasabhas, it's called an overlapping of mellows. So even though they're the same person, but they expand themselves and assume eternal distinct identities with distinct moods, appearances, and shall we say ways of dealing with their devotees. So the rasa, the transcendental mellow in the dealings between these forms of the Lord and their respective devotees are different. So there is a simultaneous oneness and difference between all the different personalities in the Bhagavan category, in the Vishnu Tattva category also. An inconceivable oneness and difference. And finally, I'll talk about the varieties that are seen within matter in the material world. Now, for this purpose, I want to narrate a little pastime that is found in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, in the Adi Leela, in the 14th chapter. As we all know, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was known as Nimai Pandit in Navadvip, where he spent his childhood and his youth, his adolescence and youth, pre-youth. So when he was enacting his childhood pastimes, one time his mother, Sachi Mata, came and gave him fused rice and some sandesh. You know sandesh, it's a milk sweet, very delicious. And she went away to attend to some other work. In the meanwhile, Nimai Pandit, instead of eating the fused rice and the sweetmeats that he had received, began to eat dirt. When Sachimata returned, she saw Nimai eating dirt and she was aghast. And she immediately snatched away the dirt from Nimai's hands and said, "What are you doing?" And then Nimai began to protest. He was very small at that time. "So, my dear mother, why are you angry with me? What is my fault? Fused rice and sweetmeats and all other eatables are simply transformation of dirt. That is dirt and this is dirt. So whether I eat dirt in that form or I eat dirt in this form, since they are the same, what is the difference? Why do you scold me for having eaten dirt in this form?" So Srila Prabhupada explains in the purports that actually Nimai deliberately was speaking Mayavad philosophy, in which they say everything is one. There is no variety, there is no distinction, there is no differentiation of any sort, but it's all one homogeneous, impersonal, attributeless spiritual light. And they say everything is Maya. And Srila Prabhupada mentions tongue-in-cheek there that everything is Maya, of course, except the nonsense that they speak. So what they're trying to say is that except everything we speak, everything else is Maya. So they say devotional service is Maya, it's material. When the Lord advents into the material world, the forms of the Lord are also material, so that's also Maya. So therefore, Mayavad does not accept variety. So Sachi Mata was shocked. And she said, "How on earth are you speaking this kind of wrong philosophy? Where have you heard this from?" So let me tell you the truth. Now, even though this dirt and this dirt is the same as you say, Why is it that people actually eat only food grains and don't eat dirt as you are doing? If we eat earth which has transformed into food grains, and then that food grains actually nourishes and strengthens our body. On the other hand, if we eat dirt in its form as dirt, then we get diseased and eventually our body will get destroyed. Then she gave an analogy. Let us make a water pot out of mud. When that water pot is made, then I can easily carry water in that pot. However, if I pour water on a lump of mud, that mud will simply soak up the water and my labor will be wasted. I will not be able to perform the function of carrying water. So therefore, even though there is a oneness in terms of the stuff or the composition of mud as a lump and mud as a pot, but in functionality, in practicality, there is a difference. So similarly, in the entire material world, there is a oneness in the sense that fundamentally it's a one category as matter. Matter may exhibit as different types as, earth, water, fire, air, ether, and so on. But basically, it's all material. So there is a oneness in the sense that it's all material, but still at a practical level, at a functional level, there is a distinction. So there is a simultaneous oneness and difference. So I think it's exactly 1 hour since I started. So I'll end my talk here. And I'll open the floor for questions. Yes, surely. Yes, I think it's posted here.
Is asking the question to Shiva Tattva. How do we regard Lord Shiva between Bhagavat and Bhagavan? How should our mood be for respecting him?
Okay. But there's also another question about Lord Shiva asked that's here in the chat box. So if I read that, then I can answer both questions together. The other question here is, you explained how Shiva, although, would you like to read that?
Shamagoti Devi is asking, I have a question regarding Lord Shiva being almost transcendental. You beautifully explained how Shiva, although is very close to Vishnu Tattva, but because of his association or proximity with material energy, he cannot be characterized as completely transcendental. So what about the Dham deity and Guru, who are the direct expansions of Krishna, but are in close proximity to this nature or material nature, but we still call them ultimately transcendental? So how do these three are different from Lord Shiva?
Okay. You see, Shiva Tattva is one of the most difficult concepts to understand. As indeed are some other tattvas like Guru Tattva, Shakti Tattva. All these tattvas are very hard to understand. It's inconceivable. Therefore, words like inconceivable have been used. Now, The understanding of Lord Shiva that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has presented is that for us, Shiva is ever worshipable. Ontologically, as I mentioned, he is in the category not exactly in Vishnu Tattva, but very close to it. He is not in the category of the Jivas, he is far above that, but he is not quite Vishnu Tattva, just because of that slight touch with Maya that he has. So, and that is because he has to perform a function in association with Maya. He does that function on behalf of the Supreme Lord. So, he wears a different hat, or rather different hats. As a pure devotee, he remains forever transcendental, ever worshipable to all of us. So we can pray to him for giving us Krishna Prema. He also appears in Vraja, he appears in Navadvip. He's the Dham Rakshak, he's the protector of the Dham, etc. So in that capacity, he's ever transcendental. But in his capacity as a demigod, because of the kind of function that he performs, he is considered in touch with matter, in touch with Maya. And because of that, there is some slight compromise. And therefore, he's not in that category. So I hope that answers both the questions. And also...
Yes, ma'am. Beautifully. So there's another question here where Shamasaki is asking, Lord Chaitanya came to give Raganuga Bhakti to the world. So if someone gets attracted to Lord Ram or Varaha or Narsimha avatar in the process of Krishna consciousness, how can Raganuga Bhakti be applied to these incarnations of the Lord? Or even, Lord himself as Vishnu. So there is only Aishwarya Bhava, not Madhurya Bhava. How do we understand this?
Okay. You can hear me, right? I just made some change. Okay. So, yeah, actually, Lord Chaitanya did not come to give a Raganuga Bhakti. Remember, Raganuga Bhakti is still part of Sadhana Bhakti. As you know, Sadhana Bhakti is devotional service in the stage of practice. It has two divisions, Vaidhi Bhakti and Raganuga Bhakti. Vaidhi Bhakti is when we practice devotional service not out of taste or greed, but out of some faith and obedience in the words of Guru and Krishna and Shastra. Raganuga is still the stage of practice, but where one's practice of devotional service is done out of spontaneous attraction for Krishna. So it is definitely an advanced stage. But beyond Sadhana Bhakti, there is Bhava Bhakti and there is Prema Bhakti. So the kind of Prema, what Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has come to give is Prema Bhakti. And not just ordinary Prema Bhakti, Unnata Ujjvala Rasa. He has come to give the Prema Bhakti of Vrindavan. And even more specifically, the love of Vrindavan as exhibited by the gopis. So this is actually the most confidential external reason for Mahaprabhu's advent. Now, the question is about what about devotional service to the other forms, the other Vishnu Tattvas like Kurma, Matsya, Narasimha, etc. So definitely if somebody is a devotee of Lord Ram, for example, like we have Murari, or we have in Chaitanya Leela, Gaur Leela, or we have Anupam, the younger brother of Rupa and Sanatan Goswamis, who could not give up the worship of Lord Ram. Hanuman, for example, is also fixed in his devotional service to Lord Ram. And no matter how much you tell him about the glories of Vrindavan, he will appreciate it and offer all obeisances, but his service will be exclusively to Lord Ram. They may appear in Gaur Leela to relish a special taste, but they remain fixed at the lotus feet of Lord Ram. So similarly, if somebody constitutionally is more inclined to serve a particular form of the Lord, so be it. But at this point in time, we do not know what our constitutional relationship with the Lord is and where we are. So we just follow the teachings of Srila Prabhupada, and in our practice, there are various elements of Raganuga Bhakti also included. For example, in the Tulasi prayer that we chant every morning, so we pray for love of Radha and Krishna in Vrindavan and so on. So we should aspire for Vrindavan. We should try to, shall we say, understand deeper the glories of the Vrajavasis and the nature of Krishna Leela in Vrindavan. And simultaneously, we should also study the entire Srimad Bhagavatam. We should hear the glories of Lord Narasimhadev and Lord Ramachandra, etc. And then the rest is, in Krishna's hands, where he wants to send us, and that will automatically happen. Doing the arati to Radha Krishna, of course, that is wonderful. That is necessary for all of us as practicing devotees. Now, whether you should do the arati to the Devis and Devatas, which means the demigods, generally our acharyas have not taught us that. They have not prescribed a regular worship of the demigods. Now, we should not consider the demigods to be independent lords. That's an offense. But it is also an offense to be disrespectful to them. So we consider them as great devotees of the Lord. So if in a particular place we come across a temple of, let's say, Lord Shiva, we should by all means offer all respects to Lord Shiva in that temple, So there is no harm at all. But we do that with the understanding of Lord Shiva being the greatest of Vaishnavas. So in that sense, occasional worship of great demigods, understanding them to be pure devotees of the Lord, is recommended by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But neither Mahaprabhu nor the six Goswamis or any of our acharyas have recommended that we should, on a regular basis, on a daily basis, worship a variety of demigods. First of all, probably because it may compromise our own understanding and faith. And secondly, perhaps also because it may confuse others who are newcomers, and they may think that the demigods are on the same status as Krishna. So to conclude, the answer to your question is regular daily worship of such of this nature, worship with the demigods, etc., is not recommended by our acharyas, but we offer all respects to them. Yes, sure.
Here we have Shri Naidu, and she offers her obeisances, and then she mentions, please explain the difference between Sadashiv and the 11 Rudras.
You see, each name or term needs to be clarified.
I don't know what happened, but is it just...
Now, can you hear me? Yeah. Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, you can hear me now, right?
Hear you, Maharaj.
Okay, I'll just speak like this. Now you can hear me, right?
Hare Krishna?
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Maharaj. I can hear you now. Thank you.
So, generally, when people speak about Lord Shiva, they also call him Sadashiva, amongst other names, which is a fact. So we all, Sadashiva can also, Lord Shiva can also be called Sadashiva. But please keep in mind the point that I mentioned in the course of the talk, that Sadashiva also refers to a Vishnu Tattva personality who exists in Vaikuntha. And it is from that Sadashiva Vishnu Tattva that Shambhu originates. So Shambhu is an expansion of that original Vishnu Tattva Sadashiv in Vaikuntha. Now this Shambhu is the original prototype Shiva for the entire material world. And it is this Shambhu who then expands himself into each universe to become a Shiva. And there are further expansions of that as Rudras, the 11 Rudras, etc. So the Rudras are also basically Shiva Tattva, but they're expansions of Shiva, who's an expansion of Shambhu, who's an expansion of Sadashiva.
Beautiful, Maharaj. Thank you. Thank you so much. We still have so many questions pouring in and so much appreciation for your talk and how you've simplified such, a difficult subject matter for most of us in a way that it's easy to comprehend. So we're very grateful, Maharaj, that you've joined us and enlightened us. Thank you so much, Maharaj. And thank you to all our viewers for your active participation. That's really making these events so appreciated and alive for all of us. I just want to take a minute to request you to go to gvcspt.com, our website, and subscribe to the mailing list. In that way, you'll be updated about all the upcoming events. And I'm sure you don't want to miss the upcoming events for this coming week. We have an amazing line of speakers coming up. Also, you can follow us on Facebook and YouTube and share it with your family and friends. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you so much, Bhakti Rasamrita Maharaj. Such an honor to welcome you on this platform.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. And I do hope all of you who are watching this are in good health and you're keeping yourself safe from the COVID pandemic. And I do hope that you're also doing blissful Krishna consciousness. Thank you very much. And all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol.